kind of summarizes where we see the need in the marketplace based on our research at this point. What we are seeing, over time, over the last, really the last year, is significant growth in the number of organizations that are looking at tokenization as a strategy for the enterprise. Some are really focused just on the point of sale. They're focused, right on capturing the data, turning it into tokens as soon as possible, and the point of sale for retailers. A lot of that has been picked up in our research as a big source of demand. But where most of the activity is, it's this shift between the growth in the percentage of companies that are considering tokenization and the shrinkage of those that have either no plans or are simply unaware of it. So it's not like there's thousands and thousands of organizations that are already tokenizing data. It's not like that. Certainly that's not what comes across in our research. What comes across in our research is a strong level of interest in understanding it, in figuring out how it will reduce cost, scope, etc., all of the benefits that I talked about, and whether or not that'll work for them, whether or not it will work for different companies. The other thing is from the perspective of the merchants themselves. When you look at tokenization versus kind of the growth, if you will, in interest in end-to-end encryption. Now, many of you have probably seen that there's an effort underway to standardize end-to-end encryption through the ANSI X9 process. But with most standards, certainly the ANSI standards process, which I've been involved in going back to X12 in the old e-commerce days, takes a while. We're talking about several years. 30 months, I think, was what it said in the initial filing before you might see a standard emerge from this. And I think the thing is, companies are not going to sit around and wait for 30 months. They want to take action. They want to implement tokenization. They want to implement end-to-end. They want to do something. Essentially, even in this marketplace, with the economy the way it is, organizations are looking for things that will help them reduce their cost. Both tokenization and end-to-end encryption promise this, and so out of all the things that people are considering, there's a lot more interest in tokenization versus end-to-end encryption. The interesting thing about this, and this particular chart, is really about trying to quantify in some very basic way the cost of tokenization versus what it would take on the other side. Meaning, if you didn't tokenize, what would you have to spend money on? So if you think about access controls, and you think about encryption, you think about password vaulting, you think about logging, some of the things that PCI DSS requires organizations to do that maybe they weren't doing beforehand. They were already doing antivirus, and they had firewalls. They had a lot of what you might call the basic controls in place, IDS, IPS, etc. But what we've seen PCI bring upon organizations is substantial additional access controls, costs for those things, substantial additional implementation of encryption and key management, and logging and management of data in a way that they weren't doing it before. So those are what you might call the incremental costs associated with implementing PCI on a given system. So if you weren't implementing it on the payment terminals, the point-of-sale servers, polling servers, web stores, call centers, fraud management applications, if you didn't have credit card data on these systems, what you would be comparing the cost savings of tokenization to is not just, let's say, the cost of encryption, which a lot of people go, well, it's either encryption or it's tokenization. Actually, I think that a more fair comparison is all of the things that you wouldn't normally be doing to secure data if you didn't have that data. So the point here is very simple. There's a lot of other stuff that companies are spending money on beyond encryption that they would have to spend less of it on if they had card data in fewer places. That's really the essence of this. Now, the other thing that I think is worth mentioning here is, there's a lot of technical issues associated with, what's the best option for protecting the data. the whole notion of application protection, at an application level, format preserving encryption, which is, I think, a reserved term. The folks over at Voltage, I think, invented that term. But the whole point here is that there's multiple ways to protect information, whether you're talking about encryption algorithms like AES-256 or triple DES or whatever. The point here is different things are better at certain aspects of this, whether we're talking about performance, storage overhead, external security, internal security threats. What is these things good at? What are the different ways of protecting data best at? Generally speaking, from our research and talking to a lot of consultants, this is less about talking to merchants and more about talking to security consultants who know these areas pretty well. Tokenization is pretty darn good in terms of less impact on storage overhead. It's very good at protecting against external threats. It's comparatively good in terms of being transparent to applications, etc. So the point here is this is early stage research. It's not meant to be definitive. It's meant to simply suggest there's certain things that tokenization is good at better than others, and others where it's not. When in terms of where tokens should be generated, how should they be managed, one of the things that I wanted to capture here is just differences that we've seen when we talk to different types of retailers and companies in the hospitality industry, which we've talked to a lot of those folks. You've got situations where we've talked to a lot of organizations, large organizations that are big, ERP implementations, and some of them, it's very application centric. The whole notion of doing tokenization for them is something that they want to do at an application level. It's ERP driven. Sometimes these organizations want to, kind of implement their own tokens. Maybe they'll create hashes, etc. That's fairly common among some of the organizations we talk to. But there's this whole, kind of enterprise-centric or application-centric view of this. Then there's the other view, which is, you look at the e-commerce perspective. When the transactions are relatively instantaneous, and what you're talking about here is the whole notion of a process, providing tokenization as a service. They're managing the tokens. They're creating the tokens. And as a service, it becomes relatively comprehensive. The whole idea being it's kind of akin to outsourcing. It's kind of an add-on service for companies that are providing outsourcing payment management services. And so instantaneous transactions is a different type of option. The other option is really something we see most in the hospitality industry, where there's this long period of time that elapses between the time that the card is taken and it's charged. So we may be talking weeks, days, months, etc. And what we're seeing here is more specialty service providers, industry-specific solutions. They work a little bit differently, and we're expecting to see, because the hospitality industry and certain other applications are very different in terms of how they work, we think it's really being set up as a different option, and certainly demand is very different in that case. Also, when it comes to best practices, we are seeing, as we said, a lot of outsourcing when it comes to payment management, payment processing, etc. More and more organizations, providing an example, for example, from higher education. So over a decade ago, a lot of higher education institutions managed their own payment processing system. They were their own gateway, if you will. And we're seeing more and more of those organizations outsource it. Certainly for smaller companies, e-commerce companies, et cetera, we're seeing more interest, very strong interest in outsourcing the whole thing. Tokenization then, and end-to-end encryption together become value-added services in a payment outsourcing environment. It's a way of providing better data management, better analytics, et cetera. So we see tokenization, end-to-end encryption as part of this overall trend toward outsourcing, helping people protect their data.